I wanted to discuss about the challenges of communication for corporates. And if you think it's not a challenge, so I was thinking about a 2019 McKinsey report that found that 70% of employees believe that ineffective communication is a major barrier to company performance. So we are talking about something that is very human and is being like a hay or some preventing performance of the company of happening. And the problem is even a little bit if we zoom to leadership, only 21% of employees strongly agree that senior leaders communicate effectively. Wow, it's not like a small problem. But let me tell you what, this time we have Pam Hurley as who is one of the most recognized communication experts. And the reason is that I wanted to clarify a little bit more about the future of communication. I wanted to understand what are the real challenges that she has been facing through the many years where she has been leading the Hurley Write company, where she has developed a curriculum that is used by hundreds of companies to improve teams writing, storytelling, and presentation skills. But there is more to that. Pam, I'm really happy to have you today with me in this episode of the Growth Hacking Culture podcast.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm excited to be here.
Pam, let's go and jump to the swimming pool and say, I wanted to ask you straight ahead, is communication like kind of the elephant in the room in the corporate world? Is it something that is really big and we have problems to accept?
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. I think it's really interesting how poor communication is the root of so many problems. And a lot of organizations just either don't know that or refuse to face up to it. And when we talk about writing in particular, you think about poor writing creates lots of problems in terms of documents getting out the door in time. It creates a lot of problems in terms of clients understanding what it is that you're trying to say. It can hurt a company's reputation. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And so, leadership has to model good communication, whether we're talking about writing, whether we're talking about presentations, whatever the case may be. Good communication is paramount in a company running effectively and efficiently.
Now, in the last year, there has been a lot of discussion about having more human-centric cultures. There has been a little bit of efforts in order to have more empathy in the way we communicate. And thanks to COVID, we have realized that the way we communicated was not a perfect one. There was a lack of empathy. So I thought that corporates were becoming better at communicating. Or is it the case, or is it like there is new challenges that have come up in the last 2 years?
That's a really good question. I would say that it depends on the corporation. So what happens oftentimes is that companies will pay lip service to good communication and, we need to communicate better and the writing needs to improve, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But then what happens when it comes down to really doing something about it, they don't. There's a big assumption oftentimes that people, especially if they're college educated, that they know how to write well, that they can communicate well, that kind of thing. But if the organization doesn't support people in terms of their writing, in terms of their communication, then the communication suffers. So there's all kinds of things that go into that. But organizations, leadership has to be, they're the impetus for good good communication. So if they're not modeling it and they're not supporting it, then it just doesn't work well. And I'll give you, for instance, we're working with a client right now, and one of the questions, so we're doing what we call a communication audit. And in the communication audit, we go into companies and we look at the tools they have for writers, and we talk to the writers and we talk to the reviewers to find out what's actually going on in terms of their written communication. And what's interesting is a lot of the writers do not feel supported in terms of the writing they do. So they don't know what to expect. So they're just writing to get it done. And so what you have is a total failure in the communication itself because they don't know what to expect. Leadership isn't guiding them, and they're just doing what they can in terms of writing just to survive.
Uh, so if I look at the way we communicate, like we have from one side kind of the rhetoric, then we have the structure of what we want to say, and the syntax, I would call it. I hope that I'm not an expert in communication, but I hope that this is the name in communication. So the problem goes beyond that because, in fact, what you're telling me, what I understand is that the clarity, I mean, people goes out of from university, they go into the workforce, they know how to say things, but they don't know how to extract in in an empathetic way so that is the message is understood. That is that the problem? They know the words, but they don't know how to make it clear for others.
Well, that can oftentimes be the problem. So there's a lot of assumptions made when you talk about communication. Communicators make assumptions about who they're communicating to and with and for, when in fact they don't, they should be doing a deeper dive into understanding who in fact their readers are, who they're communicating with, how that person is going to take the message, that kind of thing. And these are things that frankly just really aren't taught in universities, and I talk about this all the time in my LinkedIn posts, but universities do a terrible job, quite frankly, of teaching people how to write well and how to communicate well.
Mm. I share totally your opinion. So the problem itself is the lack of capacity to put ourselves in the shoes of others so that we know what they expect. Is empathy the problem?
I don't know if empathy is the problem. I would say it's more of a lack of awareness of expectations
Hmm.
from the, you're right. So I'm communicating with someone. What are their expectations? What do they expect from me? And how do I deliver that? Instead of, it may be empathy. I'm not an expert on that, but I think more to the point, it's a lack of understanding who you're communicating with and what their expectations are, and meeting those expectations and their needs.
Mm. There is hundreds of methodologies to have a structured communication. And I also know that it makes many years that your company has been fine-tuning their model of how to communicate. And my question is, how can companies using your model ensure that they have a clear and concise communication, especially in a complex organizational setup that we have today?
Right. Well, one of the things they have to figure out is why there's a problem with the communication. So a lot of organizations will just say, "Oh, we need a writing course, or we need this kind of course, or we need that kind of course," which may or may not be the case. If you don't take the time to understand what the problem is, you're spending money needlessly on training that may or may not fix the problem. And that's one of the reasons why we developed the communication audit, because that's a way for us to figure out what the root problems are. So if you understand what the root problems are, right, then you can figure out how to fix them. But if you don't know what they are and you're just guessing, then you may be right, but you may not be right. And so one of the things, that's one of the things we do with our communication audit, is help companies figure out what the real problems are. Because sometimes it's the writers, sometimes it's leadership, sometimes it's both, right? But it's very easy for organizations to get caught up in this swamp, if you will, of just they do the same things over and over and over again. Nothing ever improves. They never get out of that swamp of miscommunication because they never take the time to figure out what the problems are.
Mm-hmm. So once you have done your auditing, does it mean that certain cohorts inside of the organization will have a certain type of training versus another cohort? How does it work then?
Right, that's a good question. So what we do is we provide a roadmap, and we say, okay, based on our findings, we've looked at the tools, we've talked to your writers, we've talked to your reviewers, we've looked at your documents. these are the recommendations, these are the things that we suggest.
Mm-hmm.
And whether the company chooses to go forward with it or not is up to them. Maybe it's training, maybe it's coaching, maybe they just need a new set of tools. So there's all kinds of things that can be involved. You know, for instance, for a lot of companies, when they onboard new writers, all they do is they say, hey, look, here's some documents that we've written or that somebody's written over the past 5 years. Use these and learn how to write for our organization. Well, that's a dumb way to teach somebody to do that, right? So that could be the problem. Maybe they need mentorships. Maybe they need, right? So there's all kinds of issues that surround poor communication. One of the things I find so fascinating is that organizations often don't understand that a lot of their problems, lost money, lost time, lost resources, are actually due to poor communication.
Mm.
And they're willing to blame all kinds of other things. But if you look at it, the communication is the crux of the problem in most organizations.
Do you see specific trends? Like, for instance, if we talk about an organization that is mainly with engineers, and I'm saying that because I have that background and I know the challenges that I had for communicating in the early of my career, because we are very analytical and to explain something is a little bit tough because somehow we lack empathy. If you compare that type of organization versus an organization that is purely marketing, where people are about ideas that they want to explore, excitement, but they might not have a structure. Do you see like different trends according to the type of industry or the type of employees they organizations have?
Yeah, I mean, engineers, to your point, they love detail. They love detail, whether it's relevant or not. So we find in most engineering organizations, there tends to be they tend to write documents that are very wordy, very verbose. They oftentimes don't show readers how ideas are related. There's that kind of that kind of thing. Then we do a lot of work with scientific organizations, and they tend to explain things on such a high level even when they're writing to someone who doesn't have the same expertise. So yeah, there's a lot of commonalities in terms of poor communication among organizations, but there are differences as well, depending on the type of professional in the organization.
Hmm. Uh, you know, you make me think about that back in my days in corporate, it is true that there was an oversimplification of the root causes of lack of communication, and everybody was attending the same communication skills training, even though there was different type of problems that for each individual. And of course, it wasn't matching anyone, in fact, and the impact was very, very minimal.
Yeah.
Is there a way that when an organization decides, hey, let's do this type of strategy in order to improve communication in the organization, is there a way to measure the effectiveness of the internal communication strategy?
Absolutely. And we have metrics in place to do that. We start out with, one kind of measurement, and then we go through and then we finish up with another kind of measurement. And then we do follow-ups throughout to make sure that people are in fact improving. So yeah, you can do that. You know, people tend to view writing as, oh, it's very subjective, and it's not subjective. There are very clear, everything that we teach is based on readability studies. So it's a science-based curriculum. It's not just, hey, let's teach grammar, and we don't teach grammar because grammar has no bearing on anything, right? So it's readability. How do you determine whether something is readable? And this is based on research that scholars have done, and that's what we base our metrics on, is how do we measure at the beginning and at the middle and then again at the end.
Now, in the last years, there has been a little bit more of understanding on how the brain processes messages. Neuroscience has been popularized in the last 10 years, I would guess. Probably before that, nobody was reading a neuroscience book, and we didn't know how to interpret the signals in our brain. And storytelling has been like being in the mouth of many organizations.
Yeah.
Now, is this storytelling something that we can foresee that in the future will become even more important, especially that now that there is a little bit more of diversification of the means of communication. Maybe we write less, maybe we write through channels that where we don't need such a level of professionalism, like writing an email versus writing in a Slack channel is a little bit different, and it can be a little bit less more comfortable, more human sometimes. But is storytelling the big thing today?
Yeah, storytelling is very popular and it can be very effective. The problem with storytelling is that people don't understand the elements, right? So you have to have a hero and you have to have a guide. And so what too many organizations do is they see themselves as the hero. They're not the hero. The reader is the hero, right? And you're the guide and you're trying to guide the reader through the documents. So one of the things I talk about when I teach a class is you're the Sherpa, and you have to guide the reader through the journey of the document so that the reader winds up at the river or the mountain or wherever it is you want the reader to wind up and not lost in the forest somewhere. And so that's the crux of it. But what happens oftentimes is that writers focus too much on themselves, we see this a lot in proposals, for instance. It's like, oh, our organization was founded in 1625 and we've helped blah, 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 blah. And so it's this litany of stuff that I don't care. What I care about is, can you solve my problem? Right. And so when you think about it that way, you're not the hero. The reader is the hero. And how do you guide the hero to victory, or however you wish to phrase it? But storytelling can be incredibly effective, but it has to be done right.
The thing is that in the last years, maybe the last 10 years too, there is a continuous overload of information. And I notice it in myself, that if I receive an email with more than 10 lines, I have a problem.
Right, agreed.
And so, and you were mentioning, we need to solve a problem like right there through storytelling or being more concise, whatever is the means. We have, maybe my rule of thumb says 3 lines to say what we have to say. The rest is nobody's going to read it.
Right.
Is that even possible? Because sometimes you really have to break your head a little bit to make it in 3 lines that there is the solution. So that there is the hook for interest, either to read more and to find more information, or to have the interest of the reader. Is that correct?
Yeah. So one of the things we talk about in our classes is you have to learn to write for skimmers, because most people are skimmers. And what skimmers do is they read the first sentence and they read the last sentence. And so if you're writing for skimmers, you're going to be able to write a more concise document, but that's not what people do. People will write that first sentence. So the first sentence should tell me exactly what the paragraph is about, so I can then make up my mind whether I wish to continue to read. But that's not what they do. And engineers are especially notorious for this. They'll write something like, on January the 31st, we measured the footage from here to there. Who cares? Nobody. What does it mean? Why did you measure it? Right? What is the compelling reason that you measured that footage? And that's what should be in the first sentence. So that way I can look at it and go, okay, I care about this, or I don't. One of the biggest mistakes that writers make is forcing a reader to read a paragraph. And what I mean by that is, if I have a sentence that gives you just a fact, the lamp is on the table. All right, now I have to read to figure out why the lamp's on the table and why that matters. But if in that first sentence I tell you the lamp is on the table, and that's a problem because the lamp is glass and the table's glass, and the sun's going to come through the window and shatter everything. Well, now that's the beginning of the story. And now I understand why I should read the paragraph. But readers waste a tremendous amount of time trying to get through stuff like that because writers don't understand how to write a paragraph or how to write a sentence. I mean, it's not rocket science, but there is certainly a science to it.
We mentioned that in fact you mentioned that one of the solutions that your company is providing is training people. Now, it is one of the solutions. There is coaching, and there is other methods that I saw in your website too. Now, my question is, today, do you feel that companies are using the best way to teach their employees how to communicate? If we look at the standard traditional 2-3 days communication training that I attended maybe more than 20 years ago, is that the correct way? So slides, a little bit of practice on the go during the 2-3 days, and during the 2-3 days, I'm thinking about work, thinking about my family. Is that the correct way to learn communication?
No, you have to have support. It has to continue long after the class is over. So one of the things that we do is a virtual course. So for instance, the virtual course is 10 hours over time. So it's more like the university model. So it's 10 hours broken up into 2-hour sessions. In between that, we do coaching. In between that, we give feedback on documents. When it's over, we do refresher webinars. When it's over, we do coaching. We continue the coaching. We continue those long-term things we know work, so that those writers are supported. Because if you're, to your point, if you just do a 2 or 3 day in anything, and it's not something that you practice every day or that's supported in your organization, no, you're not going to continue to be improve. I mean, that's right. This is not going to happen. It's like if I'm going to learn how to golf, I don't go and take a 2-day clinic and then expect to be Tiger Woods or whomever it is. So it's the same thing. And organizations, even if they do a 2 or 3 day training, let's just say that they do and the training's really good, and let's just say that it is, somebody in the organization has to support those writers. You have to continue to support the writers, whether that is coaching internally or getting them to refresh and all those kinds of fun things. But somebody's got to do it. And in too many organizations, that just doesn't happen. They'll do the training and then it's like, well, they're good to go. And it's impossible.
I love that what you say, because that resonates with what I personally think about most of the traditional trainings. It is, we need to have an environment where we can practice what we do in a safe environment. We need to have feedback loop. Otherwise we don't learn, because it is learning how to do something that we need to be able alone. And you cannot learn in an intensive course of 3 days. I mean, the data is available. 11% of people remembers after 2 months of a training what the training was about, or have been probably using something out of the training. 11%. So we are wasting 89% of the budget, because we want just to have the things done very quickly without measure of the impact. And we measure rather satisfaction, or was the delivery funny and whatsoever, but not the real impact.
Right. Yeah.
For results, for actions, not for knowledge. Now, I wanted to.
It's checking off.
Yeah, exactly. And that needs to, at one moment, to stop. I wanted to think a little bit more further than today. So today we are having artificial intelligence that is accessible. A lot of people, in fact, in organizations have started using it. Sometimes in the wrong way, because I mean, when you prompt the chat GPT or another tool or Gemini or whatsoever, then it gives you the same type of structure of sentences, and people do not even correct that. And now you can smell it, that ChatGPT was there, because it's using more or less the same words. So will the rise of generative AI positively impact the future of communication? Is there a way to make good use of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a way to make good use of it, but we're not there yet. And the problem is, for instance, I was LinkedIn now. Are you on LinkedIn? LinkedIn now has these little artificial, like prompts underneath it. It's like if you write about, a lamp or something, be like, whoa, what does it mean to be, it's these dumb prompts that drives me crazy. So I wrote a post about it the other day, and then I got AI to write the same post that I wrote, right? Just to rewrite it with AI. And it was horrible, and it wasn't my voice, and it was stupid, and it was sophomoric, and I would never have posted anything like that because it wasn't intelligent.
Mm.
Right. So my post, I felt like, was reasonably intelligent and asked some provocative questions. Right. And this was not. It was just stupid. So, you know, if you don't use AI correctly, I think you can come off looking pretty stupid. Here's the other problem with AI. Somebody still has to review them. If I write a report using AI, somebody still is going to have to review that thing. And I would argue that it's going to be more onerous to review it because it hasn't been generated or written by a subject matter expert.
Mm.
So it's going to be harder for me to review because I would imagine that a lot of the content is going to be missing. Certainly, it can be used for prompts and things like that, but in a lot of the industries we work in, the regulated industry, it's a no-go because you have to put your data in and it has to be a closed
Mm.
loop system and all this other kind of fun stuff. So I know it's a shiny new thing, and people, oh, copywriters, we're not going to need them anymore, and I'm going to be able to write and not have to. You're not.
Mm.
You're not going to. It's not going to replace writing for the foreseeable future. I hope it never does because I think it's very frightening, but it's not going to replace writing for the foreseeable future.
At the beginning, I was sharing your the same type of concerns regarding the use of AI, but there is something that I will never forget. I was against Facebook because nothing replaces the direct contact, but things happen with or without us. Uh,
Sure.
and from there comes my personal question is how can we make it for the best? Because I have the feeling that there is nothing that can replace that trend. My 12 years old child is already using it. And I'm pretty sure that she will use it even more when she is going to go to college or whatsoever, she will use it more. So now it's about how can she use it in a way that where she can be fed with knowledge, can help her to structure thoughts, but not more than that, that she knows what a human can provide on top of what the engine produces.
Well, and that's the big question, isn't it? I mean, you hear about college students using it to write a paper. Well, if I use it to write a paper, and I hate to sound like a curmudgeon, but I guess I will. I mean, if I use it to write a paper instead of me doing the research and that kind of thing, I'm only hurting myself. I'm not right. I mean, it's just this. What's frightening to me about it, to be quite honest, is the the lack of. So if I go and I research a paper myself, the purpose of writing a research paper is for me to learn, right? I mean, that's the purpose, is for me to learn. But if I go to this tool, this system, and get them to write it, I haven't learned anything. So my fear is that when people use it in that way, they're not gaining knowledge and that we're just getting stupider.
Mm.
So I mean but to your point, I think we have to get into a situation where, especially with younger people, that we're yes, you can use it as a tool, and here's how to use it as a tool, but you don't want to use it as a substitute for your own knowledge or thinking or ability to learn. And that is the frightening thing to me, because it seems like an easy way. And when you're 16, 17, 18, you think, oh, I'm just going to take the easy way out. And when you're 30, you're like, wow, I really wish that I'd taken the time to learn that. So that to me is the frightening part about it.
Have you observed in organizations uh, good uses of technology in order to improve the way we communicate?
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the things that comes to mind right away is how people submit documents for review. You know, you have to have a systemized way to do that. And I know it sounds like a small thing, but if people aren't, you know, submitting documents in a consistent way using the same system, and people are reviewing in lots of different ways, that's a lot of time, wasted time and energy. So it's really important to do that. It's really important to make sure that, you know, the technology you're using to house your SOPs and to house your documents and all that kind of fun stuff is useful. Because what happens in a lot of these organizations, especially in the biotech and life sciences, they all tend to use the same technology, the same platform.
Mm.
And instead of investigating other kinds of platforms, and sometimes these platforms are just not very good, but it's because it's what everybody else in the industry uses, that's what they use as well.
Mm. And that might be a good use of artificial intelligence, because artificial intelligence potentially can read documents, and the way we learn is that we need information right now, not to go to a class in order to get that information. And if we have a systematic way to get the answers to challenges that occur to us, like in on the flow of work, that is quite amazing that we can ask the question to the bot, and that this bot is reading several documents and giving us the
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I
that,
mean there's definitely ways to use it well, and that would be a good way. I'm just not a big fan of people using it to write for them,
yeah.
and especially high school and college kids. I'm not a fan of that at all, because I just think just removes any kind of learning, and that's what you're there to do.
Yeah. Pam, how many years exactly your company, Hurley Write, has been working?
36.
Oh my God. Now, in the 36,
I know I don't look it, but yeah.
oh, you don't really.
I do.
Pam, in the 36 years, what are the major trends that you have seen in terms of this, uh, in terms of communication? And how does it look the future? How does it look 10 years from now?
Oh, that's a really good question. Well, I think that one of the trends that we've seen is that people's writing is getting worse instead of better. I think there are a lot of reasons for that. One is what you alluded to earlier. We are bombarded with communication. You know, in any given day, you've got, you know, email and LinkedIn and social media and emails and all this other kind of stuff coming at you. And so it has become more difficult for people to focus on what it means to communicate, like reading a book, for instance, let's just say. So attention spans are being diverted, our attention spans are shrinking. And when
Hmm.
attention spans shrink, the focus that's required for writing is going to diminish as well. Because real effective writing requires time
Hmm.
and space. And if you're unable to focus and provide that, or give that required time to writing, then your writing is not going to improve. And then we see a lot of people, and oftentimes it's not a fault of their own, it's a fault of the organization, is that they're just trying to rush and get it done because the organization, yeah, I gotta get this done now, you know, and that kind of thing. And they have competing projects and that kind of thing. So it's interesting that communication, again, and I mentioned this earlier, is that companies tend to, they don't oftentimes tend to put a premium on it, internally or externally, when in fact that is, we talk about this all the time, document is, that is the deliverable, that is what people see. And
Hmm.
so it doesn't matter the good work you do behind the scenes if your documents are unclear, unreadable, incomprehensible. That's what people see. That is the deliverable. So all the work, all the hard work you do behind the scenes doesn't matter. And if I had to guess, and I don't know the future, if I had to guess, I would say that communication is going to continue to diminish for all kinds of reasons. Social media, I think, is a big problem. You know, the Google, you know, generation, if you will, that people look for the quickest answer instead of doing any real deep thinking or deep research about problems, you know, that kind of thing. So I think, and I think there's more of a an acceptance too in organizations for writing to oftentimes not be as good as it could be for lots of reasons, time crunches, that kind of thing. So I think all of those are going to create a world where communication is going to not be as good as it could be. I guess I'll put it that way.
Are you talking in particular to written communication, or do you mean the overall set of means of communication? Like today, there is more and more like mini videos that we send to each other via Loom, for instance. In my work, I use Loom to communicate with a remote team. Loom is
Yep.
just recording the video, less than 5 minutes to say what I have to say. Every morning I do the same, and is done. So diminishing, it means less words written, or diminishing means bad, shitty quality.
Well, so when I think of communication, I think of communication as a back and forth.
Mm.
That's what I think when I think communication. So, for instance, if I send you a Loom video, unless I open that Loom video, we haven't really communicated, right? So, and I'm not saying that what you're doing is good or bad. I'm not saying that at all. But what I'm saying is that communication, for it to work well, there has to be a sender and there has to be a receiver, and then there has to be this dialogue back and forth for it to be real communication. Otherwise, it's just one-sided. Right. And so that's what I mean. When I think communication, I'm thinking a back and a forth like you and I are having now. That's communication. If you were just sitting here and talking at me for 45 minutes, that I don't consider that to be communication because it's one-sided. It's just you. Right. But communication is the exchange of ideas. Right. So we have back and forth, we talk, we disagree, that kind of thing. That's what I view as communication.
And that's the part that is going a little bit to hell today.
I would say yes.
Indeed, indeed.
I would say we're getting very used to one-sided communication, and that's a problem. I mean, and again, I mean, you look at people on their phones, that's one-sided. That's, in texting and, instead of picking up the phone, instead of getting up and going and talking to your colleague in the next cubicle, we email. I mean, so I think that there's a real beauty to verbalizing, right, thoughts and having an exchange of ideas. And again, I'm old, so maybe that's part of it. I'm just old fashioned, but I do think there's a real beauty to that, and it's something that I would hate to see. I would hate to see go away, but on the other hand, I can see it being less important in organizations.
Exactly. So let me recap what we have been covering today. So we started with a big question regarding the challenges of communication for corporates. So we have been saying that, in fact, a lot of the employees consider that it's a barrier to company performance. We have said that in many cases, leadership is the one who is communicating in a very bad way. It goes beyond just what we learn in academic when we are in university. We know the words, but we don't know how to think about the person receiving the message and on the way this person is going to be processing the message. So it's not about that because I went to university that I'm a good communicator and know even how to write an email. I can be very, very bad, and the challenges can be diverse. We have said that in certain organizations that are more technical, it can be one set of challenges. In organizations that can be more creative, it could be another set of challenges. We have been talking also about the impact of technology like generative AI, how it can produce, worsen or not the way organizations are communicating. And it's a very dynamic thing that is happening today because technology is enhancing the different channels. At the same time, it's overloading us with with information, and the time that we spend reading, we are not ourselves practicing how to be clear with others. Pam, this is it is quite fulfilling the number of things that we have covered in such a short time. And I wanted to ask you if people wants to reach you out to ask you questions about these challenges of communication, from storytelling, from the written communication, from technical writing, how can they reach you out?
Well, thank you for that. So you can hit me up on LinkedIn, Pam Hurley. Email me, pam@hurleywrite.com. Call me at 877-249-7483. Look us up on our website, hurleywrite.com, and contact us there. But I'm very passionate about communication. So if you have any questions at all, I would love to answer them.
Thank you very much, Pam, for this wonderful discussion about the challenges of communication in corporates. It was really, really nice to finally meet you. Thank you very much.
Nice to meet you as well. Thank you very much for having me. I certainly do appreciate it.
Thank you.